Hello and a warm welcome to Researcher's Desk. It's a great pleasure this morning in the UK, afternoon in Sweden, to welcome Ben Kenward. Ben is Senior Lecturer in Psychology at Oxford Brookes University in the UK. And Ben's going to be speaking with us today about climate activism's effects on public opinion. Ben, we're very much looking forward to listening to you. Thank you for being with us. I'm going to turn my own camera off so that we get a really good recording. I will, however, be hovering around in the background and I will appear if anything goes technically wrong. So you can just assume everything's working unless I suddenly appear. Ben, a warm welcome to Researcher's Desk. Thank you for spending this morning with us.
Thank you very much, Alistair. It's a great pleasure to be here. Um, so yes, how come I'm in Sweden? If I'm at Brookes, I'm on a career break here, and while I'm here, I'm doing all sorts of other things as well. So I'm doing sustainability as usual group at work for a research NGO, European Sustainable Youth Group. I've been working at Uppsala a bit off and on as well. And I'm an activist myself, and that's where this is coming from. So I'm going to relate this to my own experiences as well. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about, hold on, sorry, I just need to tweak so I can see better. There we go. What I'm going to talk about is mainly the effects of disruptive environmental protests on public opinion. So I'll start off by talking briefly about why public opinion matters. And then I'll talk through three different experiments, one of which is quite old, two of which are much more recent. So we've got data from Sweden and the UK. Um, and I'm just going to give you my conclusions up ahead because actually it sometimes helps to do that. Mainly what we're finding is null or small positive effects on broad environmental opinion. But we are seeing some issues that I'm going to loosely call polarizing attitudes to the movement itself, which may or may not be problematic depending on exactly how you interpret that. Um, uh, Protest, well, yeah, it's becoming part of the furniture in a death spiral locked system. That's kind of my main take home. It's probably usually useful. It has some negative side effects. It's hard to evaluate how important they are. It's certainly not enough. And so it's like aspirin for a cancer patient. It's helping a little bit. It's keeping the wolves a little bit at bay, but they're still creeping closer. And I'm going to end with some thoughts about where we might go, some positive suggestions, given that I'm not optimistic that we can just keep doing the same things that we're doing now and it's going to work. Okay, so maybe don't try and read all my graphs if you're not a regular social science graph reader. I'm very much going to try and talk on a general level, but I have some graphs that would take you 2 or 3 minutes to understand if you're not used to that kind of thing, and I'm only going to show them for 1 minute. So maybe just concentrate on listening to what I'm saying, and if you can get the graphs as well, that's great. But don't worry if you can't, because I'll explain them. Okay, so the bottom line is we're in very serious trouble, as we all know. And the bottom line metrics are really just how much CO2 is up there and how badly we're destroying the natural environment. So public opinion wouldn't matter very much if public opinion didn't influence those things. But the good news is we know from political science. I'm not a political scientist, but I collaborate with at least one political scientist who's good on this. Clara, I think you're out there. Hi. Um, so yeah, they do show some responsiveness, our democracies, to public opinion on the environment. So this graph is excellent rage bait. Anger is a gift. It helps us get stuff done. I tend to believe that. And what you can see here is that how likely a policy is to be enacted. That's what we're measuring on the y-axis. How many people want that policy to be enacted, and what the relationship is. And there's quite a strong relationship if you're very rich, and there's almost no relationship at all if you're not. But the elites are part of public opinion as well. So if we can convince them, then this is really worth doing. Anything that convinces elites is worth doing, but I do note that might be hard, and maybe we need a revolution instead. But anyway, okay. So The first experiment is going to talk about is on what the effects were of the April 2019 Extinction Rebellion in London. And I did this because I was part of that. I was part of making it happen. I am an activist, and so on. So, and basically, I thought I can't try and bring London to a standstill, especially in the early days when Extinction Rebellion was bigger, especially in the UK where it's biggest. It Rebellion wasn't just a name. It actually felt like we were trying to rebel against the government, and we came close to actually making that happen in the way a traditional rebellion happens. The government has to negotiate and come to terms because they can't control what's happening. We were close to that. And I knew it was going to be like that, and I didn't want to do that without evaluating what the effects were going to be. So that's where this study came from. This has recently been published in a peer-reviewed journal article, so you can look at that if you want to. Okay, so we were just simply trying to find out how exposure to media reporting about this affected individuals' beliefs and intentions relevant to the environment and activism. And there are two methods we're using here. We're measuring a longitudinal sample of nationally representative individuals. So we're asking them what they think about environmental issues before, during, and after the rebellion. And we're also doing an experiment where we experimentally manipulate how people are exposed to information about what's going on. Those people are also roughly representative, but they're a bit too overeducated. Um, so on the very first day, this study was only really possible for me to do because I knew what was going to happen and exactly when and where. So it started early in the morning, and most people aren't all over the news at lunchtime, but news comes out very quickly. So we captured these earliest news items, and we made one ourselves, and then we got people on the internet who mostly, because we asked them, didn't yet know about this, and showed them either one of three different media items or a control item, basically nothing to do with it. So we can compare. When we ask them then questions about environmental opinions, we can compare what your environmental opinions are if you're someone who's just seen information about the rebellion that's going on, or if you're not someone who's just seen information about the rebellion going on. So it's important to realize we're not asking them how they think they're affected by the protest. We're not really asking them much about the protest at all. We're looking at how their general opinions are affected, and some specific ones as well. Yeah, and the longitudinal method is the same questions, but just before, during, and after without manipulating any exposure. And some of the measured opinions that we look at, these are the main ones: attitudes to environmental problems. So how concerned are they? So we are, they're answering agree, disagree questions like I worry about the effects of climate change in my lifetime in this country, that kind of thing. How whether they're satisfied with the government's action, to the extent that to which they support civil disobedience, and this is a bit weird with the control group. For the control group, it's hypothetical. They're just told there is civil disobedience going on, like given a sentence or so describing what it is. Do you support it? Um, so yeah, and then would they do things which would be good if more people did talk about the issues with friends and family, go on protest marches? Okay, so the three media items we have are a BBC News video. So you can see a BBC reporter there. We got a Daily Mail text article, which was written very quickly and uploaded to their website. And that's me 7 years ago, recording like a kind of the sort of thing you'd find on social media. So I'm sorry, London, I'm blocking your roads. This is why I'm doing it. It's an emergency, etc. Okay, so this definitely had general impacts in the sense that people knew about it because these are the longitudinal people. Suddenly, it goes from about 10% to about 50% of people knowing who Extinction Rebellion are. Um, Right, these are examples of graphs that I wouldn't try and understand if you're not instantly on top of that sort of thing. So I'll just say, environmental concern, we did see increases from before to during and from before to after. We couldn't measure that in the experimental methods. They're just seeing one article and then being asked what if they're concerned. It's not shifting the dial in a measurable way, but it is being measured longitudinally, and I'm going to come back to the longitudinal result in a minute. Um, we do find that the XR produced social media style video does increase people's dissatisfaction with government action. Uh, an appreciable amount. That's a decent effect size for like a single exposure to a single video. You can measure concern in all sorts of different ways, and I'm not going to talk about the pros and cons of different ways of doing it. This way of doing it is perhaps more properly called salience, issue salience, asking people to list what they think are the most important issues facing the country. And actually, maybe it's not salience if they get to tick them rather than spontaneously mentioning them. Clara can correct me about this later if she wants. So anyway, it's a measure of concern. What do they think this is an important issue? And that rocketed at the exact time of the rebellion. So anyway, there you go. That was data from YouGov rather than my data. Okay, so activist behavior intentions. Um, this was kind of polarized a bit. So uh, we're seeing very small increase. People who see the video of me talking like an activist, very small decrease. People who read the Daily Mail article. Um, that's about it. Um, and disruption support. For me, this is the most important result of this. The BBC showed a clear increase. So people who'd actually seen this happen were more supportive of the idea that this should happen than people who were basically presented with it as a hypothetical. So that suggested that at that time it was possible to grow the movement by enacting the movements, and indeed it was. Okay, I before I move on from this particular study, I'm going to show more studies which show answer the same questions in different ways and add further nuance. I just want to say maybe the biggest mistake in my life was to go home from this. We were about 20,000 people on the streets of London. We were all getting repeatedly arrested. Actually, not all. I don't know exactly how many arrests there were, but it was thousands. Um, uh, and the police basically clearly couldn't cope, and the government did actually start negotiating. It's weird to say there was a meeting between a government minister and representatives from the movement, which didn't go anywhere. And why would it go anywhere? Obviously, governments hate negotiating with people like this, and they're only going to do it if they absolutely have to. And we went home, and the main reason we went home was we were exhausted. So maybe this will be the most important thing I say today, depending on what happens in future and what you people go on and do. If you're ever in a situation like this where you have actually mobilized in a way that is actually effectively challenging the status quo, don't go home just because you're tired and you think you discharged your responsibilities. Who knows what would have happened if we didn't go home? Because we didn't have to. We didn't go home because we were all arrested and beaten. We went home because we were exhausted. Um, and people were coming to join us. Anyway, right, the next study. This was the first thing I did when I came to Sweden a few years ago, and I was interested in studying Återställ våtmarker, who were very much in the news, doing all sorts of interesting and potentially productive things. And I became interested in the different tactics they were using. At the time, they were shifting perhaps away from motorway blockades, and they were doing more guerrilla wetlands restoration, and I think they still are. So it's exact same kind of method where we have a control group and groups who get to see different kinds of messages as they would see through the media about what's going on. And there is so these articles, they're not real articles like in the previous study. And that's but they're very closely based on one particular real article. And the reason they're not real is because I wanted the two different ones to be very similar so that we could, if there were differences between wetland restoration and motorway blockades, it wouldn't just be because, say, there were more people involved in the motorway blockade, or the commentary was different or something like that. So that's the guerrilla wetland restoration article. Obviously, the original is in Swedish. Um, that's the motorway blockade article, and it's basically the same except it's a motorway blockade. Um, and yeah, so here are two things we measured: government action dissatisfaction, uh, and climate worry discussion likelihoods. And apologies to anyone who doesn't speak Swedish, but they're just Swedish questions that measure these things. And we don't see any effects of any of either of the exposures. But when we look at a more specific question, this is honing in on the specific demand of återställ våtmarker, um, then what we're seeing is a negative backlash effect. And so again, if you're not familiar with this kind of graph, don't worry about it too much. The top of it is the easiest bit to see. Basically, motorway does nothing compared to control, but the belief in this importance is um, measurably, clearly lower when they see the guerrilla restoration. And I was a bit surprised by that. And so I collected a second wave of data doing exactly the same thing. This is very important. In social science, we have a lot of problems with unreliable results. If you really, really want to believe a result, do the same experiment again and see if you get the same result. And we did, and we did get the same results. Um, okay, so that is quite bad results for Återställ. Luckily, that's not all we know about Återställ. Luckily for those who believe in the movement. I was also part of a much larger study that did a kind of much broader 360, using many different methods, including interviews with politicians and relevant experts about their opinion about how it all played out and what effects it had. And there's even some more quantitative stuff, like measuring things with numbers to see what the effects were, that actually indicate that all the actions are associated with positive shifts in voting intentions. That's really interesting. Um, but And there's very little doubt that Orvia had a major effect in raising the profile of the issue. But what the exact political consequences of that is a little bit unclear. There's probably more money for restoring wetlands now, but maybe that's at the cost of other environmental policy that requires funding. Okay, so this last study, this is the only study that I wasn't just the main mover and the shaker on. So I'm giving a shout out to Clara here, who's my collaborator on this and who initiated the study. So yeah, so as we've seen, sometimes disruptive activism seems to help, sometimes it doesn't. When and why? And so usually when we do these kinds of studies, it just focuses on one or just a few protests. How much can we generalize from that? And generalization is a huge problem, okay, in the social sciences. Society is so complicated, you can hardly use quantitative tools to try and understand it. I can go out there and measure, connections between things, measure that variable A correlates with variable B. It doesn't mean I can shift variable B by going and tweaking variable A. So we can try and do a controlled experiment, which is basically by definition the kind of thing you can do where you can then know, I tweaked variable A and it definitely shifted variable B. But if you do an experiment like that where you control everything artificially, you've learned something that you're confident about, but you don't really know how broadly it applies. You might have just studied one protest. Does this apply to protests in general? When we've done this a couple of times and found different results from different protests, what are we supposed to think about protest in general? So a solution is to study many representative examples of protest at once in a controlled way, and that's called stimulus sampling. That was Clara's brilliant idea. So uh, we randomly sampled 100 articles from the population of all UK mainstream media articles about disruptive environmental protests in the last 2 years. And we used them all in the same type of experiment. So each article was seen by, oh, I can't remember. It's not just that divided by 100 because there's a control group as well. It's that divided by 100 and a little bit less because of a control group. Um, And these articles vary a lot. You know, there are quite a lot of different tactics that people are using. Um, uh, Different, like, is it a small elite group of protesters, like 3 people on a motorway gantry, or is it 1,000 people, like in a city centre? Is it are they disrupting a sporting event? The UK equivalent of Melodifestivalen, those kinds of things happen in the UK as well. How does the article frame the protesters? How much does it emphasize the disruption? How much does it emphasize the protesters' message? What would an average person think of this protest? Would an average person think this protest is acceptable or unacceptable? That's something we've actually rated in itself with a separate group of people. So finally, we're thinking we're going to actually be able to say why different protests maybe seem to have different results, because we've actually for the first time ever been able to like address that question properly. And we'll see in a minute what the results were for that. First, I'll talk about the effects of an average article. So, average article, it does make people a lot more likely to spontaneously list climate change as a problem for society. It's not the same as, not quite the same. I've realized the YouGov result, people were choosing boxes to tick. This one, that we're just making them type spontaneously off the top of their head what is the most important thing. So, uh, or the most important things. Okay, so that's nice. Although salience isn't enough on its set by itself, and it's more transitory than the other things. Support for climate policy, it had a rather small but positive effect, and that's nice. Um, but it does make people distance themselves a little from the environmentalist movement in terms of, do they see that they have an environmentalist identity? That's possibly a problem. Uh, uh, we found a review, Clara and I, that says environmentalist and identity probably has no causal impact on people's behaviour. So maybe, whereas policy support probably does. So maybe that negative effect is less important. Okay. Um, None of the properties of the protest or the article, the way the article framed the protest, mattered for anything. Nothing. And remember, we've got 3,000 participants. We've got 100 articles with good variation in these things. We've done so much to double check that we've got appropriate statistical power. We really do. We're confident of this result, but it's weird considering that previous studies have shown different protests or protests framed differently have all sorts of different results, often positive, but sometimes negative. You've already seen that in this talk. So that's weird. And I will say something about it in a minute. And another key difference is that it used to be the case, Clara and I are in agreement on this, there aren't really studies out there showing that effect that depends on the political ideology of the observer. Strange, you might think it's strange, but positive effects apply equally to people whether left wing or right wing. Not so in this study. Clearly, most of our variables, it has a more positive effect on people who are report being left wing. And so now we find that basically this is an interesting thing. Overall, there's no effect on soft activist behavior intentions. They're very soft. They include things like just talking to people. Um, uh, but that's not because there's not an effect. It's a very small positive effect for left wingers and a very small negative effect for right wingers. There's perhaps a little bit of worry about environmentalist identity. Do you know what? I don't have time to talk about this properly. It's not worth me spending minutes on them, given that I'm running out of them, because it's all a little bit. Anyone who knows what mediation analysis knows that we're all a bit kind of about there's problems with the approach these days. Yeah, I'm going to skip it. But there might be problems where people are disidentifying from the environmentalist movement. I am a bit concerned about it. Um, yeah. Okay, so my overall interpretations of all of these. Okay, so disruptive environmental protest, it still works to raise the issue. Awareness raising is temporary, however, and not in itself useful. You also have to have support for the issue, otherwise nothing would happen. Um, uh, People's responses to such protests are generally just about positive right now, but that's politically unstable. You know, if we saw continued shifts towards right-wing populism, I think it's likely that the average effect would become negative. Sometimes subject to issue-specific backlash. Me and Clara are less concerned about that than you might think, because that does tend to be very specific to the issue. It's as if the when we find that effect, it looks like it's as if the participants are kind of saying, I don't like what these people did, so I don't like their particular ask, but it doesn't affect their general attitudes to environmental concern and environmental policy support more generally. Basically, and this is what how I explain the weirdness that different protests had basically on average exactly the same effect, and we couldn't find any influence of any of the variables that vary between protests that you might think would make a difference, like what tactics they're using, how disruptive it is, how objectionable people find it. I think people are just scanning the article and going, "Oh yeah, environmental protest again. Yeah, nothing's new." And their response to it is basically an automated habit at this point, and that's why the response is more politically polarized, because when you're going off just an automated habit, you're more likely to just align with how people in your social in group are like traditionally responds. Okay, so this causal chain, we know this whole causal chain, and we have quantitative models for every single step. Protest arrests leads to protest coverage, leads to better opinion, leads to better policy, leads to less CO2, leads to fewer deaths. And so you can ask me, how many arrests now in the UK buy a life? And I'm going to say 1,000. Okay, so that is simultaneously both a ridiculous back of the envelope calculation with error of orders of magnitudes. Um, it could be multiple orders of magnitude, but that's the central estimate. That's my best guess. It is back of the envelope, but it's genuine scientific calculation. And for me, it's not enough. Okay, I don't want to get arrested to save a thousandth of a life again. I've been arrested quite a few times. I've got a trial in Stockholm coming up for disrupting an airport, and you know, I'm proud of having done that, and I'm not going to say I'm never going to do more of that kind of stuff. But I'm not satisfied. We need to do better. And unfortunately, my overall analysis right now is we have to target elites with begging or with revolution. Um, like nothing in between is going to suffice. Um, Other relevant experts may not think exactly like me. Clara's got a nice review. There's another review which I also think is not bad. I think it's a little bit boosterish. Um, yeah, but finally, I've only got 1 minute left, and I'm maybe going to take five. Sorry, Alasdair, you were very kind to say you wouldn't be cross if I went over by a few minutes. I think I may.
I won't
Um,
be cross. You carry on, Ben.
Thank you. So this is my broadening out massively. Okay, in a sense, this is all distraction, and this is not just a response to me myself. This is a response to Martin Hugman's really interesting presentation last week, where he talked a lot about individual psychology. He was talking about masculinities, how that's affecting how people think about the environment. And I think we're focusing too much about on how human individuals think about the environment. And that might seem like a strange thing for me to say, but the thing is, human individuals, or in carefully organized groups, are basically sound. If human individuals were in charge, or carefully organized groups of human individuals were in charge, things would be fine. Okay, we are worried. We do want to do stuff about this. People have tried very hard. Very senior people have tried very hard. You know, Jimmy Carter decades ago tried really hard. What fucked it up? The fossil fuel industry. Okay, so they are not human. Okay, I'm a biologist originally. I'm still working as an ecologist. I'm brought up with evolutionary biology. Okay, so I'm going to say this and I'm going to explain briefly why I'm saying it. Okay, nation states and corporations, they are non-human intelligences. Nation states might be very scary, but they're quite often aligned with human values. Corporations are totally divorced from human values and they're very stupid where it counts. And I fear they're going to kill us all. Okay, we need to deal with the fact that AI already took over. Okay, we're already sharing this planet with a non-human intelligence that's taking over, and if we don't have that analysis and be guided by that analysis, we're all going to die. That's my prediction. It's not just about climate anymore. It's also about existential threat due to the fact that corporations are rolling out AI, silicon AI, as fast as they possibly can, which I think could have terrible consequences. Okay, so I'm just going to use like 30 seconds each to tell you why they're non-human intelligences, why they've already taken over, why they have catastrophically misaligned values, why they're stupid where it matters. And I'm just also going to note they're already killing people, already starting to kill more people than humans are. So I did this just for this talk. It was rather neat. The first two sources I found for war deaths, one of them said a quarter of a million war deaths in 2024. The other said an eighth of a million. Climate, the first two sources I found making prognoses per year up to 2050. The first said a quarter of a million and the second said half a million, right? So the death toll from just one branch of corporations is already bigger than human war. Right, they're non-human intelligence. They're basically ant nests. Okay, so it's entirely uncontroversial to a biologist that there is such a thing as a super intelligence, which operates in a completely different way to the individuals that are part of the network that make it up. That it's an emergent property of ant colonies represent and solve problems at a completely different level of intelligence that from an individual ant. Okay, and that's basically what's happening with corporations. It doesn't matter if you don't have any psychopaths in the corporation. The emergent behavior from the corporation can still be analogous to psychopath. Or I think a better analogy is a shark than a psychopath, um, because that's all they can do. They can't do anything else. Um, they have taken over. This is a list of top 200 economic entities in the world according to revenue. The red ones are corporations, the black ones are states. There you go. Enough said. Um, they are catastrophically misaligned, and AI people are saying this. So Stuart Russell is probably one of the most famous experts in AI in the world, and this is a quote from him: "Fossil fuel corporations have outsmarted the human race." So within the AI world, there are, which is by the way where I borrowed this phrase from, misaligned. That they worry a lot that the artificial intelligence is going to have misaligned values. It's clearly already happening. They are stupid where it really counts. How can they have outsmarted us and still be stupid? Okay, so if you're a biologist, the first thing you say about intelligence is that it's specialized. Okay, you can't, it doesn't, it's very, very hard to define intelligence in a general way, although we need to try and we do try. Um, but basically, entities have intelligence that tends to be quite specialized. So what you can see here is like octopuses, you know, generally speaking, they're less intelligent than humans, but in certain domains, they might beat us. Like they can navigate a 3D maze better than we can. A chess computer, obviously, in almost any relevant domain, it's more stupid than a human, but it can beat a human at chess because it's got better pattern recognition and other things that help for that. So this is where corporations are, in my opinion. you've got to talk about when it's the context of them being able to make money and when it's not in a context that's relevant for them making money. When it's in a context that's relevant for them making money, they're super intelligent. They can outsmart us. They're doing it all the time. They have basically already done it. Um, when it's not about money, they basically can't think about that. Because corporations are basically evolved in a marketplace where survival of the fittest is entirely tied to how much money they can make. Everything they do is about making money. And they can't plan ahead because the market doesn't work that way. So that's the way that they're stupid. Okay, so we can limit corporate power. We have to focus everything on this. We have to Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have a revolution. And given that we don't have a revolution, I think the main thing we need to do is make elites understand that corporations are everyone's enemy. They are the enemy of humanity. And as a whole, as if we think of ourselves as human, we need to band together, elites and the populace, and we need to start taking them down. And the first thing we do is target their free speech because their free speech, their snake tongues is how they are killing us. Okay, Jimmy Carter wanted to make a green energy transition decades ago, but he didn't because the snake tongues got into his administration. Okay, but we can do this, and so exactly how we do that, I don't have time to talk about, and you guys have collectively much more imagination than I do. Yeah. Finally, I should acknowledge we would be quickly dead if the corporations disappeared tomorrow. So yeah, I don't know. It's important to say that if you are as negative towards them as I am, we can't just destroy them. We need to co-opt them. Okay, that's it. I am sorry I took a little bit too long. Many thanks for patience, uh, Alistair. Yeah, I'm
Thank
done.
you, Ben, for a super dynamic, fantastic talk. Really, really exciting. And I've learned a lot, and thanks for also sharing your research results.